Find a comfy position, and when you're ready, let's begin. Emma arrived at the cabin as the sun was setting into the trees, painting the sky in shades of apricot and plum, casting long shadows that stretched across the clearing, like dark fingers reaching toward the door she had not opened in months, perhaps even longer. Time having grown slippery in the way it does when days blur into weeks, weeks into months, months into a year that passes before you've properly noticed it begun. Her dog Freddie emerged from the truck first. A beautiful large black creature of mixed heritage, mostly Labrador and German Shepherd, with suggestions of something older, something wilder woven through his bloodline. He stood for a moment, nose tilted to the wind, reading messages written in scent. Deer had passed this way. A fox had hunted near the woodpile. Rain was coming, but not tonight, not yet. Satisfied with his recon, he trotted toward the cabin with the easy confidence of one returning home after too long away. She followed more slowly, her body protesting the long drive, her shoulders tight from gripping the wheel, her mind still humming with the white noise of obligations left behind but not forgotten, merely postponed, waiting for her return like patient predators. She carried her bag in one hand, a bag of firewood in the other, moving through the familiar choreography of arrival. Unlock the door, prop it open with the stone kept there for that purpose, carry things inside, light the propane lanterns, check that mice had not invaded during her absence, that the roof was not leaking, that everything remained just as she had left it. The cabin was small, cozy, built by her grandfather's hands decades before she was born. One room serving as a kitchen and living space, and a loft above for sleeping. Some ancient taps at the sink that drew water directly from a well so deep and cold, the first mouthful always made her teeth ache a little. No electricity, no internet. The kind of absence that felt luxurious precisely because it was chosen. Because she could return to the connected world whenever she wished. Because this isolation was temporary and therefore enjoyable, even desirable. She'd come here seeking something, though she could not have named it precisely. Clarity, perhaps. Direction, certainly. Some sense of purpose beyond the mechanical progression from one task to the next, one day to the next, 1 year to the next. It was January now, the new year barely a week old, and everywhere she looked in the world she had left behind, people spoke of fresh starts, new beginnings, resolutions and goals, and the determined optimism that arrived with every turned calendar page. But she felt none of it. Felt instead like someone who had run a marathon only to discover the finish line had been moved. The race extended indefinitely. promised rest, perpetually deferred. She was tired, bone tired, soul tired, tired in ways that sleep did not seem to touch. And beneath the tiredness lay something else, something harder to articulate. A sense of having somehow missed the point, of having been moving but not progressing, of having been busy but not building, of having survived yet another year without quite managing to live it. So she had come here to this cabin at the edge of the forest with Freddie and her questions, and the vague hope that the quiet might offer what the noise had not. Some glimpse of what she actually wanted. Not what she should want, not what others expected her to want, but what her own heart desired when divested of all the layers of performance and adaptation in the exhausting work of being the version of herself that the world required. She unpacked with practical efficiency, storing the food neatly in the cupboards, hanging her coat on the peg by the door, rolling out her bedding on the loft mattress. Freddie watched her from his preferred spot near the wood stove, already claimed, already settling in with the deep satisfaction of a creature who understood the essential pleasures of life. Warmth, safety, the presence of his person. Nothing more needed. When the interior work was done, she turned her attention outside. The fire pit waited in its circle of stones, ash from the last fire still visible beneath a layer of fallen pine needles. She cleared these away, built a new fire with the careful architecture her grandfather had taught her. Tinder in the center, kindling arranged in a teepee around it, large pieces added gradually as flames took hold. She struck a match, touched it to the dried grass and birch bark she had gathered, watched as fire caught and spread. That small miracle that never quite lost its power to fascinate. This transformation of fuel into flame, matter into energy, solid into light. The fire built slowly, claiming more wood, growing from tentative flickers to a confident blaze. Heat began to radiate outward in waves, pushing back against the evening chill. She retrieved the chair from inside. Solid and weathered grey, its wide arms perfect for holding a mug or a book, or simply her own arms when she needed to wrap them around herself. She positioned it at the optimal distance from the fire, that sweet spot where warmth reached but smoke did not, and settled into it with a soft wool blanket across her lap, the fabric thick and delicious, smelling faintly of cedar from the chest where it lived during the off-season. Freddie emerged from the cabin and took his place beside her chair, arranging himself with the serious attention dogs bring to the work of lying down, circling twice before collapsing into a position that looked uncomfortable, but which he maintained with evident satisfaction. The fire's warmth reached him, and he sighed deeply with such pure contentment that she felt something in her own chest loosen slightly. some small knot beginning to unwind. She sat, and the forest rose around her. Not all at once, but gradually, the way the forest always revealed itself, through increments of awareness, through the slow adjustment of attention from internal monologue to external presence. First, she noticed only what was loudest: the fire's crackling conversation, her dog's occasional readjustment, the sound of her own breath moving in and out, a rhythm she had been performing without thought for every moment of her life, but which now, given attention, became something to observe, something almost meditative. Then the next layer emerged. Bird calls from the trees, though she could not see the birds themselves, only heard their evening exchanges. Territorial announcements, contact calls, the soft murmurs of settling for the night. Wind moving through pine boughs, creating a susurrus that was not quite music, but held something of music's qualities. Something of pattern and variation, theme and repetition. The creek she knew ran 50 yards to the east, too distant to hear its individual voice, but close enough that she could sense its presence, could feel the way it shaped the soundscape, absorbing certain frequencies, reflecting others. She pulled the blanket higher, tucking it around her waist. The air here smelled different than the air in the city she had left behind. It smelled deeper, softer somehow, of resin and earth, of wood smoke and the particular crispiness that came with cold nights in coniferous forests, of organic exchange and vigorous growth happening simultaneously. The forest's constant work of breaking down and building up, composting and creating, the endless cycle that required no human intervention, no human understanding, simply continued regardless of whether anyone noticed or cared. Against her face the air felt cool, almost cold where it touched her cheeks and nose, though her body beneath the blanket remained warm from the fire's radiating heat. The contrast was pleasant. Cold air in her lungs, warm core in her body. The boundaries of her physical self made more apparent by temperature, by the meeting of internal warmth and external cold. She let her head fall back against the chair and looked up. Above, the sky was darkening through its progression of blues, from the pale cerulean of late afternoon, through progressively deeper shades of ultramarine and navy, and finally into that particular darkness that was not quite black, but a blue so saturated it verged on purple, the color of deep, deep water, of distant mountains, of velvet examined closely in candlelight. The first stars appeared, though appeared was not quite right. They had always been there, had simply become visible as the bright light of day withdrew, allowing their fainter light to register on retinas evolved to notice such things, to navigate to such points, to find meaning in such patterns. She did not know the constellations, had never learned them properly despite periodic resolutions to do so. But she appreciated them nonetheless, appreciated the way they transformed the sky from empty void into populated space, into a neighborhood of burning points, each one a sun like her own sun, each potentially attended by planets, by the possibility of other eyes looking up at other skies and wondering, as she now wondered, what it all meant. If it meant anything. If meaning was something that existed independent of human invention, or whether meaning was simply what humans created to make sense of existence, to give shape to the shapeless, to find pattern in what might be merely chaos rendered partially visible by the accident of consciousness. Freddie shifted beside her, his weight resettling, his breathing steady and calm. She envied him sometimes, the simplicity of his existence, the way he moved through the world gracefully unburdened by questions of purpose or meaning, satisfied by the immediate pleasure of warmth and food and companionship, living entirely in the present because the past and future held no reality for him. Only the now, only this moment, only the fire's warmth and his person's presence and the interesting smells carried on the wind. But even as she envied him, she knew she would not trade places, would not give up the questioning and wondering and seeking that made human existence both more complicated and more rich. It added dimensions to experience that pure present moment awareness could not access. As a dog, Freddie knew contentment, but perhaps not joy. Knew comfort, but not transcendence. Knew loyalty, but perhaps not love in the way humans understood love. As something chosen, something given despite and because of knowledge of knowing the other one's flaws. Something that required the capacity to imagine future and remember past. To hold someone in the heart across distance and time. But who truly knows what a dog feels and thinks? She knew she didn't. Love was there nonetheless. The fire popped, sending up a small shower of sparks that rose into the darkening air like reverse stars, like brief new constellations that lit for seconds before winking out. She watched them climb and fade, mesmerized by their small trajectories, their brief burning. She had, after all, come here with questions, but now, sitting in the deepening night with fire and dog and forest, the questions themselves began to seem less urgent, less solid. They were still there, the wondering about what she wanted to do with the shape of her life, the sense of having spent a year in motion without real movement, the exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. They no longer pressed so insistently for immediate answers. Perhaps, she thought, the questions were not meant to be answered all at once. Perhaps they were meant to be lived with, sat with the way she was sitting now, not avoiding them, but not attacking them either, simply allowing them to be present while she was present, seeing what emerged from the companionship, the coexistence, The new year had arrived with its usual fanfare, its usual insistence that now, right now, was that time to decide everything, to plan everything, to commit to transformations that would somehow make this year different from the last. This version of herself different from the version that had struggled and survived the year before. But what if that was wrong? What if transformation did not work that way? Did not arrive through force of will or detailed planning or grim determination? What if transformation was more like the forest? Something that happened slowly, incrementally, through processes too subtle to observe in real time, but which, given enough time, given enough patience, created fundamental change. The forest did not announce its transformations. It did not make resolutions on January 1st. It simply continued its work, day after day, season after season, growing and dying, growing again. And if you looked away for 5 years and then returned, you would find the forest profoundly changed. New trees where saplings had been, openings where storms had felled giants. The whole landscape subtly rearranged by the quiet accumulation of small dailiness. She pulled the blanket higher still, tucking it under her chin. The cold was increasing as full night arrived, but the fire pushed it back, created a sphere of warmth within the larger cold, a pocket of comfort in the wilderness. This was what her ancestors had done, she thought. Sat beside fires, watched darkness gather, found ways to make small warmth in vast cold, small light in vast darkness. The technology had changed, the particulars had shifted, but the fundamental human situation remained. We were creatures who needed warmth and light, who created them when they were absent, who gathered together against the dark, because together we were safer, warmer, less alone. But she was alone here, essentially alone, with only Freddie for company, and yet she did not feel lonely. The forest was not empty, but full of life conducting its own business, full of creatures moving through the night on their own urgent errands, full of trees breathing and growing and dying and feeding the next generation of trees, full of water moving, earth shifting, wind carrying seeds and spores and pollen. The whole massive interlocking system of exchange and transformation that made life possible, that created the very oxygen she breathed, the water she drank, the wood that fed her fire. She was not separate from this, she realized. Not an observer standing outside looking in, but a participant, a part of the system. Her own breath contributing carbon dioxide that the trees would transform back into oxygen. Her own body a temporary organization of atoms that had been and would be again part of trees and soil and water and other people. The elements cycling endlessly through different forms, never created, never destroyed, merely rearranged into new patterns, new configurations, new expressions of the infinite. The thought, this constant dissolution and reformation, brought a strange comfort. She would not last forever, but she was part of something that would. A particular configuration of matter and consciousness would dissolve, but the matter would continue, would become other things, would participate in other lives, other forms. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was lost. Everything was simply transformed, again and again, in an endless dance of becoming. The fire burned lower, and she added more wood, watching as the new places caught, as flame found its way into the cracks and crevices, as bark blackened and peeled and fell away, revealing the glowing interior. The heart of the wood consumed to create light and warmth. This too was transformation. Solid wood becoming heat and light and ash. Its potential energy released. Its stored sunlight given back to the night. Freddy lifted his head, looked toward the tree line. His ears swiveled forward, attending to something she could not hear. She followed his gaze but saw nothing. Only the dark mass of trees against the slightly less dark mass of sky. Whatever he had heard, a deer perhaps, or a raccoon investigating the smells from the cabin, did not alarm him sufficiently to require action. He lowered his head again, returned to his repose, content that all was as it should be. She envied his certainty, his ability to assess a situation and determine whether action was needed, then to rest completely when action was not required. She had lost that skill, or perhaps had never possessed it, had instead developed the habit of constant low-level vigilance, constant readiness, constant preparation for the next thing that would require her attention, her energy, her response. Even here, even now, even sitting beside a fire in a forest with nothing that actually required her attention, she could feel it. That humming tension, that inability to fully settle. That part of her mind that remained alert, scanning, preparing. But what was she preparing for? What trouble was imminent? What urgent matter was approaching that required such constant readiness? Nothing, she realized. Nothing was coming. Or rather, something was always coming. That was the nature of time, of life, of existence. But nothing was coming right now, in this moment. That required her immediate action, her immediate response, her immediate anything. Right now in this moment, there was only the fire and Freddy and the forest and the night. When none of them required anything from her, except perhaps her attention, her presence, her willingness to simply be here rather than somewhere else. Either in the past she could not change, or the future she could not control. She took a breath, deeper than the ones before it, held it for a moment, feeling her lungs expand, feeling her ribcage open, then released it slowly, letting it carry away some small portion of that constant tension, that constant readiness. She did it again and again, not forcing anything, not trying to achieve some particular state, simply breathing with intention. Allowing the breath to do what it had always done. Bring in exactly what was needed. Release what was not. Maintain the basic exchange that kept her alive, that connected her to the atmosphere, to the trees, to the whole breathing planet. The stars had multiplied overhead. The Milky Way now visible as a river of light flowing through the darkness. Billions of stars too distant to distinguish individually, but present as a collective glow, a reminder of scale, of the vastness in which her small concerns existed. Somewhere in that river were planets, were possible beings looking up at their own skies, where suns being born and suns dying, were black holes swallowing light, were nebulae creating new elements in their cosmic forges. The whole universe engaged in its work of creation and destruction, of organization and entropy, of something arising from nothing and returning to nothing, only to arise again in different form. She thought about the year that had passed, the year that had left her so depleted, so uncertain. What had she actually done? When she tried to remember, the days blurred together into an undifferentiated mass of tasks completed, obligations met, challenges solved temporarily before recurring in slightly different forms. She had worked, certainly, had maintained relationships, paid bills, kept her body functioning, moved through the required rituals of adult existence. But had she lived? Had she experienced anything that would remain with her, that would become part of the story she told about her life, part of the meaning she made from the raw materials of days? She was not sure. And the not being sure felt like failure, felt like proof that she had somehow missed the point, had been doing life wrong, had been focusing on the wrong things, while the right things slipped past unnoticed, unappreciated, perhaps lost. But what if that too was wrong? What if there was no right way to do life? No correct set of focuses, no optimal strategy for living that she had somehow failed to discover? What if life was simply what happened while you were busy either living it or worrying about whether you were living it correctly? And the worrying was part of the living, and the uncertainty was part of the experience, and none of it was failure, so much as simply the condition of being human, of being conscious, of being aware enough to question your own existence. The fire crackled and a log split, collapsing into the coals beneath with a soft whoosh of released heat. Flames leaping higher for a moment, then settling back into their steady consumption. Freddie's breathing had deepened into sleep, small sounds escaping him, dream running perhaps, or dream barking at dream squirrels. She reached down and rested her hand on his silky shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through his thick coat, feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, the steady rhythm of life continuing, unquestioned, untroubled by concerns of meaning or purpose. What did he know that she had forgotten? Or what did she know that burdened her with consciousness he was spared? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Perhaps it was not a matter of knowing at all, but simply of being. The dog, fully inhabiting his dog nature. She is struggling to inhabit her human nature. Both of them part of the same vast web of existence. Both of them necessary, both of them enough, exactly as they were. She let her eyes close, not sleeping but simply resting them, allowing the other senses to come forward. The smell of smoke, sharp and sweet. The sound of fire, irregular percussion. The feeling of cold air on her face, warm blanket on her body, solid chair beneath her. The taste of the air, slightly bitter with wood smoke, slightly sweet with pine resin. All of it present, all of it real, all of it happening now, in this moment, regardless of what had happened before or what would happen after. And in that moment, something shifted. It was not cataclysmic, not like a bolt of lightning or a voice from heaven, or any of the transformative moments described in stories. Just a small internal adjustment, like a piece of furniture shifted slightly to make a room feel more spacious, like a knot loosening by the smallest increment, like a door that had been closed tight, now opening a crack, letting through a sliver of light. She did not need to have all the answers right now. She did not need to know what she wanted to do with the rest of her life, the rest of her year, even the rest of her month. She only needed to be here now, present in this moment, this fire, this dog, this forest, this night. And then when this moment passed, she would need to be present to this next moment, and the one after that. And if she could do that, if she could simply show up for the moments as they arrived, perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was actually what living was. Not the grand plans and transformative resolutions, but the quiet, simple work of being present, of paying attention, of noticing what was actually happening rather than what she thought she should be doing or what should be happening. The exhaustion she had been carrying, maybe it was not proof of failure, but simply proof that she had been carrying too much, trying to control too much, worrying about too much, extending her attention across too many moments simultaneously, instead of focusing it here, now, where she actually was, where she actually had power, where her presence actually mattered. Of course, she could not change the past, could not undo the year that had passed, could not reclaim the moments she felt she had wasted or missed. The past was done, was fixed, was already becoming memory, already being edited and revised by the unreliable narrator of her own mind, already transforming from what actually happened into the story she told about what happened. And she could not control the future, could not guarantee that her plans would work, that her efforts would fully succeed, that the path she chose would lead where she had hoped, that she would avoid pain or difficulty or even disappointment. The future was unknown, unknowable, territory that existed only as pure potential, as possibility, as the not yet written continuation of a story whose plot she could influence but not dictate. But she could be here now, could feel the cool air and the warm fire, could hear the forest's night sounds, could rest her hand on her beloved Freddie's shoulder and feel his breathing, could watch the stars and marvel at their distance, could feed the fire and watch transformation happen, could sit with her questions without needing immediate answers, could breathe in and breathe out and trust that the next breath would come and the one after that, and that breathing was enough, being was enough, she was enough, exactly as she was, exactly here, exactly now. And although the realization did not solve everything, did not make the exhaustion disappear or the questions evaporate or the uncertainty transform into certainty, it loosened something, created more space, allowed possibility. She did not need to figure everything out tonight, did not need to emerge from this cabin with a complete plan, a new set of resolutions, a transformative vision. She simply needed to rest, to be here to allow the forest to do what forests do, hold space, create silence, remind her through their patient presence that life operated on scales, both faster and slower than human urgency, that transformation took time, that there was wisdom in waiting, in not knowing, in allowing things to unfold rather than forcing them into particular shapes. She opened her eyes and looked at the fire. It had burned down considerably. Would need more wood soon if she wanted to stay outside. But she found she did not want more wood, did not want to extend this particular moment into something it was not meant to be. The fire had given her what it could. The night had offered what it had to offer, and she had received it. Not perfectly, not without a little resistance, but well enough, well enough. She stood slowly, her body protesting slightly, muscles stiff from sitting, the cold having worked its way into her joints despite the fire's warmth. She folded the blanket, draped it over her arm. Freddie lifted his head, looked at her with that patient expression dogs have perfected, waiting to see what would happen next, ready for whatever came. Neither pushing for particular outcomes nor resisting what arrived. "Freddie," she said softly, "time for bed." He stood, shook himself vigorously, followed her toward the cabin. She paused at the door and looked back at the fire, now reduced to glowing coals, still radiating heat, but no longer displaying flame. Tomorrow it would be cold ash, ready to be cleared away, ready to make room for the next fire, the next warmth, the next gathering of light against darkness. But that was tomorrow. Tonight she would sleep in the loft, wrapped up in her warm blankets, listening to the forest sounds through the cabin's walls, feeling the day's tensions continue through their slow dissolving, allowing rest to do its quiet work of restoration, of preparation, of creating the foundation for which tomorrow's version of herself could emerge. She stepped inside and the dog followed, immediately claiming his spot near the stove, even though no fire burned there tonight. She moved through her evening rituals, washing her face with cool water, cleaning her teeth, climbing the ladder to the loft, arranging herself in the bedding, adjusting until quite comfortable. From the loft's small window she could see a picture of sky, a scatter of stars. The dark silhouettes of pine tops swaying slightly in wind she could not feel but knew was there. Moving through the forest, touching every tree, every branch, every needle. Connecting everything through its invisible medium, its constant passage. She closed her eyes and listened. The cabin's small sounds, wood contracting as it cooled, Freddie's breathing from below, her own heart beating steady and strong. The forest's larger sounds, wind, distant owl, the creek's constant murmur, and beneath it all the vast silence that was not actually silence, but simply the absence of human noise, the presence of everything else. She let herself sink deeper into her bed, let her body grow heavy, let her thoughts slow and scatter and finally quiet. The questions she had brought here remained, but they seemed lighter now, less urgent, more like companions than burdens, more like interesting puzzles to explore gradually, rather than problems demanding immediate solution. She did not need to know everything tonight. She did not need to have figured out the perfect path forward, the optimal strategy, the transformative vision. She simply needed to rest, to sleep, to allow the night to do its work, to trust that tomorrow she would wake slightly different, slightly renewed, and that the difference would be enough. The renewal would be sufficient. The small daily accumulation of small daily changes would add up to transformation, not because she forced it, but because transformation was what happened when you stopped forcing, when you allowed, when you rested, when you trusted. Sleep approached, gentle and inevitable as tide. She did not resist it, did not try to think one more thought or solve one more problem. She simply let go, let herself fall into the darkness that was warmly welcoming, that nightly dissolution of consciousness that made consciousness possible, that small pause that made life livable, that rest that allowed renewal. And in the morning, when light came filtering through the forest, when birds announced the day, when her dog rose and stretched and reminded her that simple needs still required meeting, food, water, warmth, she would rise too, would descend from the loft, would boil the kettle, would greet the day, and would step outside into whatever weather had arrived, would find that the questions remained but felt different, felt answerable not all at once but gradually, one small choice at a time, one present moment at a time, one breath at a time, would find that the exhaustion had lifted somewhat, not disappeared completely but diminished, made manageable by rest, by permission to not know, by the forest's reminder that life continued regardless of human planning, that trees grew without schedules, that seasons changed without resolution, that the world kept turning and she could trust that turning, could rest in the continuation, could allow herself to be part of something larger rather than trying to control everything herself. She would find that the path forward was not a single dramatic transformation, but simply the next step, and then the next step, and then the next, each one taken with as much presence as she could muster, each one enough, each one building gradually towards something she could not yet see, but could sense approaching. Not perfection, not arrival, not final answers, but simply a version of life that felt more aligned, more authentic, more joyful. She would find she was ready not for everything, but for this next step. Not for complete certainty, but for continuing despite uncertainty. Not necessarily for ease, but for engaging with challenge from a place of greater rest, greater resource, and greater trust in her own capacity to meet whatever came. She would find that the cabin had done what cabins do, provided shelter, created the ideal conditions for rest and reflection, and that the forest had done what forests do, stood witness, offered silence, reminded her through patient presence that she was part of something much larger, something that did not require her perfection, only her participation. She would find that she could return to the world she had left, carrying with her this night's gifts, the fire's lessons of transformation, Freddie's lesson of presence, the forest's lesson of patience, the darkness and its lesson of trust, the question's lesson that not knowing was not failing, but simply being human, awake, alive in a world far too complex for simple answers, too beautiful for cynicism, too intriguing for denial, too precious to waste on worry about whether she was doing it right. Right, after all, was not a destination, but a direction. A series of small adjustments, small course corrections, small choices made with as much wisdom and care and self-compassion as she could muster in any given moment. And in some moments she would choose well, and some moments she would choose less so. And all of it would be part of the path, part of the process that continued until it stopped. And even then, continued in different forms, different expressions, different arrangements of the same eternal elements, dancing their eternal dance. She slept deeply, held by the cabin, surrounded by the forest, covered by the sky, part of everything, separate from nothing, exactly where she needed to be, exactly when she needed to be there. Enough, just as she was. Enough as she would be. Enough.